You can literally just watch them take off, vertically, get on the wing, fly through transition, turn off one of the engines purposefully. As the system is set up, it always balances itself, so it actually turns off another one. So it flies on the wing with 4 of 6 motors.
Was somebody in there? You are listening to Avery's Around the Desk podcast, where we dig into markets, companies, and ideas shaping what is coming next. I am Sean Emory, founder and chief investment officer at Avery & Company. Today, we're honing in on eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing. We're bringing on Travis Brooks. He ran operations at Blade, one of the big publicly traded companies providing air transportation logistics for hospitals across the U.S., mostly focused on helicopters. Now, today, we're not talking about Blade. We're talking about Joby, and we think this is one of the clear leaders in the eVTOL space. They're going vertical, trying to build the actual aircrafts themselves, trying to then attach a consumer experience to that, in addition to focused on vertiports, which are essentially where many of these aircrafts will take off and land. Travis runs the account Let's Talk Joby. If there's anyone who knows more about this company, send them our way, but I think we got the guy. Before we jump in, though, let's start with a quick disclaimer. This conversation is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. We may hold positions in some of the companies discussed. Please do your own research before making any investment decisions whatsoever. So why does this matter? Why are we talking about eVTOLs today? The truth is we've been talking about this for years. Our latest Avery Idea Day, we held, multiple conversations around eVTOLs. We think this isn't just about cool flying machines, even though these machines are pretty cool. If it does work, we think it has the power to reshape the fabric of society. Think about how cities were built around rail, highways, subways, all linear in nature, A to Z. If you compress a 2-hour commute into 15 minutes, you really change where people live, how land is valued, how economies function. Regions that were probably once considered remote in nature could become high-value commuter zones. The layout of cities, the cost of housing, access to opportunity. eVTOLs could really flip it all. That's what we're trying to unpack today. But I definitely wanted to bring on Travis to talk about the eVTOL space and Joby specifically. So Travis, welcome. If you can just give us, that elevator pitch of, why Joby, what interests you and, any other, important stuff in a condensed window here.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for having me. Looking forward to the conversation and hopefully can share a little bit more information about, Joby, the sector, Archer, Blade, some of these others. But, to your question, why is Joby, why is eVTOL important and how will this disrupt things? We were, kind of speaking offline about transportation and things getting disrupted. And I think the best analogy in a short way to describe it is digital to analog. Analog being you have to move on the flat plane that is the ground. And then digital will be essentially kind of an internet effect where I don't think people truly understand that you can fly above everything now. When we get into an airplane at this point, you're going for business or vacation, you're thinking that it's a place that you wouldn't imagine that you would get to with a vehicle on the ground. And these vehicles will be serving those trips, those routes, at least to start with because of range. But in the air and the amount, I live here in Los Angeles, the amount of friction, obviously everybody knows here because of traffic. There's some use cases that are very obvious there, but then other ones that, for Joby in particular, when you look at a Japan, maybe it's not as spread out or as large, but there's some geographic things, whether that's getting over bodies of water, mountains, et cetera, where you can actually have a quite dense location that still utilizes these because, again, for that kind of digital versus analog effect, you can get above everything. So I know not a 3-word answer, but the best way to kind of really wrap around what this will be for the future, but the future being like a year away.
Yeah, got it. So we're talking about electric vertical takeoff and landing aircrafts, eVTOLs. Again, these are battery powered machines, built-in redundancy for safety. You'll speak more about that. Hydrogen is also part of the conversation. Maybe we go there. That still carries some, historical stigma. Many remember the Hindenburg disaster, which involved hydrogen. But if we zoom out, we focus on what, matters today. Blade currently operates helicopters, not necessarily a competitor, but they'll likely transition to eVTOLs over time as a technology, as that matures, as the framework for regulatory, evolves. Archer, direct competitor, taking more of a modular approach, building with off-the-shelf components, trying to simplify, some of the ability to get FAA certification, partnering broadly across manufacturing, go-to-market. trying to scale faster, capital constraint potentially, even though they've raised some capital, plenty of capital actually. Joby, on the other hand, is going fully vertical, building everything in-house. And to their credit, honestly, and to your credit, for following it, that approach has gotten them this far and further than most. So there are a few other players worth noting. You can share more about those, but help us frame the broader landscape, who's taking, which approach, which advantages lie or where they lie, and how this all might, converge over time.
Sure. So, yes, in terms of, as you broke it down, Joby has, from the very beginning, selected to be vertically integrated. There's some really, interesting things that they're able to leverage and, benefit from by doing that. Obviously, people know that vertical integration, the Teslas, the SpaceXs, some of these other companies of the world, but the principle of vertical integration, actually goes back. You could almost say that the assembly line had that type of feature to it. So for Joby being vertically integrated, they have the aircraft. They've also built a proprietary software. We can maybe touch on that software has a potential to be a SaaS line of revenue for them because it is aircraft agnostic. And I can tell you from working at Blade, it is really interesting, but a lot of these operators who are operating helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, the private jets of the world that you hear about, they're still running these on some very base level legacy software. Some still just using Excel spreadsheets. And so those are some of these things that Joby has the hardware in the aircraft. They have the software in the Elevate OS proprietary system. When you put those things together and they tie it into the Uber app via that integration and partnership with Uber, you start to see where vertical integration is going to, this isn't just a slight benefit for Joby. This could be, obviously they have to deliver, but this could be why everybody's focused on certification now. I've always said it was manufacturing and operations. You have to you can have the certification. That's great. It's an expensive piece of paper. But being able to manufacture these aircraft, but moreover, operate them. And the fact that Joby's, the entire ecosystem, the entire stack, as people would say, is connected is, it's not even just a moat. It's something that's priceless and somehow is still, I think, quite undervalued. A bit different was Archer's approach. Obviously, Archer, it was either 2017 or 2018, I believe, that they were founded, as opposed to Joby, which was founded in 2009. So obviously a huge skew of time there. But also battery technology wasn't where it was when Joby started. So they were pioneers. It's really hard to compare them apples to apples, the journey. But Archer, because they had a little bit less time and they wanted to leverage, in their words, saving capital, we'll see if it actually saves capital in the end, to be more horizontal. So they're using current aviation suppliers that have different components and things that are already certified and conforming, that say if you have an airplane, you can update the radio in it or, update the propeller blades or these other components. They're going to try and leverage that type of strategy, I guess, to try and, beat Joby to market with it. I think that the challenges that we might see, and there was an interesting thing I posted a while ago of the Ford CEO talking about how legacy automotive has had so much challenges versus Tesla, and the fact of that, in particular to software and their electronics systems and harnesses, because each individual supplier has built those with their own different, code bases, et cetera. And so having to merge all those things together is why if you get into, not just a Tesla, but for the most part, a Tesla, the UI is pretty clean. You get into even a Volkswagen, but brand new, an ID, it looks like, somebody is slapping together something in MS-DOS. So those are, for those two companies. In terms of for Blade, just like quick little clarification, but Blade themselves don't own the aircraft, so they wouldn't be considered the operator. They've dubbed it as being asset light. So they essentially are a charter broker. They have a lot of other layers and services that they offer. That's why they aren't just everyone else, but they leverage, partnerships with operators there in New York, some of the other areas that they service, South Florida as well, where they've had not just helicopters, but fixed wing aircraft that they've used. They used to have a service called Blade One that ran between New York and Miami. But yeah, that's kind of what the landscape of those three look like and how they're attacking this market. I have went a little bit further on Joby, but the vertical integration and the threads that they have between all layers of their business are really something that I don't know how it's underappreciated, but it is. And then, there's a lot of other side pieces that you can plug into that. The Toyota partnership. Toyota's been helping Joby build their factory for the last 7 years, but also the manufacturing processes, et cetera. You can bet that, the term that they use is Kaizen, which is just like steady improvement. You constantly improve every day, and that's how you get compounding. But that isn't just in the manufacturing. They have leveraged that through. I mean, I've talked with these people at the factory. It's not just on the manufacturing. This goes through to how the software works, how the software will integrate into the operational side of things and the aircraft. So anyway, that's where I think a huge piece of the puzzle for Joby will be, especially once certification happens and manufacturing starts to scale up, and you actually see how do you run a service that you can say, hey, we're going to make 1,000 of these airplanes. Like, great, cool. How do you actually run that service? Like, how do you track, pilot duty time? How do you track the MR and O functions? Maintenance is going to obviously be less of an issue for these vehicles versus combustion. But then the platforms that these companies have used, and I'll let you kind of steer me where you'd like for the conversation at this point. But there's some features of the Joby vehicle that allow them to be even lower maintenance outside of just being electric, where you see an Archer or even Vertical Aerospace is another public company, a much smaller market cap, but more propellers, more motors means more maintenance, more parts, more things to be replaced, more components. So anyway, some different strategies they've all taken.
Yeah. So going vertical, obviously, the skeptic in me is saying, two of the comps on the vertical side are basically Elon Musk, which is kind of like a 101. There's been others out there. You think of like, some of the best consumer or enterprise, facing products, whether it's, Apple, but they didn't even vertically integrate. They manufacture out of Foxconn and then, they assemble. So it's really hard. And then now we're kind of seeing, granted $3 trillion later in terms of market cap, seeing the potential as AI hits Apple. And then this isn't an Apple conversation by any stretch, but it's more saying going vertical, depending on the environment and timing and all the, the nuances of an industry, allows or prevents, some of the optionality that's out there as a industry kind of forms. So you think of historical transportation, I think Tesla is the only one that's really executed on that and has done it well. You think of everything from buses to trains to airlines to, everything. There's best in class for every part of the stack. Why do you think Joby can execute that? And then also going vertical, can be pretty expensive. I think Elon Musk, one of his best traits is actually just capital raising, specifically early on. His voice was always out there, and the confidence around him, the aura was allowing him to, raise capital, keep that stock price, pretty elevated and forward thinking. Does Joby have that kind of leadership at the helm that you think can actually, deserve, some of that premium that I think Tesla has achieved? And now we're seeing it, move into some of his other, startups, not even startups anymore, but other, businesses. So that whole mindset is, that thought is running through my mind right now.
No, 100%. And I think, something along my journey with Joby is, as much as I'm, I hate to say like a bull per se, I just, very fond of what the work that the company has produced, and actually, they've done what they've said they were going to do. But you do have to be realistic, right? And vertical integration is a challenge because you're taking on everything. Now, at the beginning, when I first started looking at Joby, I think that it's kind of twofold. At the beginning, obviously, a lot more scary of a concept because you have to build out everything at where they are. To fast forward to today, you're looking at, they've had a facility in Marina, California that has already put out at this point 6 vehicles off of the production pilot line in Marina. That facility is slated to go from 15 to 25 aircraft. There was a recent article from Paul Sciarra, that featured Paul Sciarra. He's the executive chairman, that actually gave a hint, and that was confirmed, let's just say, that they are going to be able to scale that to 50 vehicles. And so that type of change in capacity, again, to kind of fast forward to now, you couldn't do that if you weren't vertically integrated, because you wouldn't control everything. You'd have to go through so many other layers. So that is something that Joby has done through a lot of build out, and where I think it's unique. Obviously, the Tesla and the SpaceX, they're one of one. Even to kind of talk about where Apple uses some layers of it. I've heard AWS. Some people have tried to apply vertical integration to that. But even like Prime, right? They eventually bought a fleet of airplanes, and people don't know, but Amazon has like 100 planes, I think, now in their fleet to try and vertically integrate everything. But anyway, to Joby's side, it's a little different with the aerospace side of things, at least from my understanding and where we look at it now. This hardware, by farming it out, for lack of a better term, for others, there's going to be extreme difficulties. If there is some type of challenge with that part, if there needs to be a slight modification, if you want to upgrade your vehicle, there's so many other layers that need to be, even for something that might be quite small in aerospace, there's a lot of downstream effects. And for Joby, to your question about, the capital intensive nature of it, luckily from the very beginning, and it is also part of the strategy, Joby is vertically integrated, but also they're very stealthy, and they started out that way. Most people didn't know about them. It's only, the last couple of years have you been able to get more and more information. That's kind of what started my journey with it. But in their stealth kind of nature, and it's from the founder, Jobin, he likes to be very quiet about things. And so it's why also Joby isn't out spending money on promotional campaigns and getting onto late night TV shows and some other things where, there's millions of dollars that could be used for other things, such as this. Joby is invested into their capital, not just burning it, but their capital is going to be used for, extensive period of time, because these facilities, especially in Marina, that's always going to be the HQ. They'll move their mass manufacturing to Dayton in that facility. But for right now, anyway, these are just some of the components. And obviously the proof will be in the pudding, right? They got to make all these planes and everything else. So I won't be able to come back on your show and say, see, Sean, I wasn't crazy. Vertically integrating the company was the right direction. But for how they've used the capital so far, they've been very, very, conservative with spending that. That's why they didn't scale up, their facility in Dayton. To talk about the competitors, they built a huge facility in Covington, Georgia, in Archer. And I put out a post this morning. We've only seen 2 pictures of the inside of it that are essentially empty, with a worker like staged walking across it. But why build that facility? Why even say that you're going to build all these planes out of it, and you don't even have the certification yet? You don't have those things. As opposed to, Joby has been very specific with how they've done that. Their Dayton plant, they didn't even start building on the green space. They bought a smaller USPS facility that was not being used, so they just retrofitted it. They've repainted it. There's already people that have confirmed there's machinery and tooling going in there. That's, again, where vertical integration, being capital smart with your capital efficient, if you put those 2 things together, I think is why the Joby story is so compelling.
Yeah, I saw your recent tweet. You use some of the the existing tool, or the new AI tools, computer vision, incorporated in this to really estimate the size of those hydrogen tanks. Obviously, a sharp way to go about it. It's a good reminder of just how far these tools have come, especially when you layer context on top of imagery. But let's bring it back to Joby. If I think of the stack, meaning the layers of what they're building, it does get interesting. They're building the aircraft themselves, which is obviously a huge technical and regulatory hurdle. But long term, if history is any sort of guide here, this part of the stack tends to get commoditized. Certification's hard, yes. But once that hurdle is cleared and others follow, margins in manufacturing tend to compress. So the question is, where does the value accrue to throughout this journey? They've got a consumer app that's interesting, potentially powerful at scale, but we also know acquiring consumer demand, isn't exactly cheap. If you look at, that 2016, 18 to 21 cohort of consumer apps, many now are sitting in kind of the app graveyard. So while the app gives, Joby a direct relationship with demand, it's, a tough road unless network effects or brand really take hold and they're bringing, one plane at, vehicle at a time. Then there's the software stack. If Joby becomes kind of the de facto platform from routing to fleet operations to data layers, that could be a real advantage for sure. We love software. Software tends to be where the margins are most durable. Especially if you're able to lock in, as the layer others tend to build on or use to connect, point A to point B. And finally, you've got the vertiports, which I think is fascinating, physical infrastructure. This is underrated in my view. We're not talking about traditional transit routes where everything is kind of fixed. These are point-to-point routes where, you're routing things across dynamic city networks. You know more about that than me. If Joby can build or control that infrastructure, the takeoff and landing kind of points, I think that becomes a powerful network effect, maybe even a business in all by itself. So help us, kind of break this down. Where do you think the value really resides across the stack? Is it machine, the app, the software platform, the physical infrastructure, the vertiports and network? Anything you have there?
Yeah, well, that's a great kind of segue, and I'll tie a couple pieces with that together. And I think vertiports, out of the things that you said, that's where the most important things that will be, I think probably in the next 6 months what we hear about. So kind of leaning in there as, once certification happens, it happens. It'll be in the rear view. It's all looking forward to your points. So from the vertiports, Joby has been partnered with a company called Skyports Infrastructure, based overseas, based in Europe, but overseas for us. And they've been doing a living lab, which is essentially kind of look like a shipping container back in the day that they have at the Joby facility. And that was to actually see, there will be a service component of it, but also with the scaled operations, it's going to be a little different than an airport or some other thing, because you're going to have a TSA type of process, but very fast, right, in order to get this many passengers through. And so the vertiports will actually be the unlock, because it'll be a funnel, and that'll be a pinch point. And so with the Skyports partnership, the first, as far as we know, there might be a couple little oddballs or odd locations in China, but this will be the world's first dedicated vertiport in Dubai, and that's in partnership with Skyports Infrastructure, RTA, which is the regulator in Dubai themselves, and Joby. And so I was actually in Dubai this past December, so I guess about 8 months ago, and got to see that facility, and it was just an empty parking lot. We've seen, and we've posted, a couple of the Joby guys have got some satellite photos and things where you can see over time that footprint is growing quite rapidly. And then just recently in the Dubai launch, Anton Khoury, who's the head of Joby in the Middle East, confirmed that they feel very good about that having that coming online in Q1. So that vertiport, the next piece that you're speaking about, the network effects. So one vertiport's great, two vertiports great, A to B, B to A. Those are the two routes you can serve. But just adding one other route, it's not a linear growth. And so each, as they've been called by Joby, node on the network will start to create these network effects. And they've actually, that reminds me, I've got something already prepped, and I'll post it today, that Joby had put out about what does that look like as you add vertiports, how many trips can you do each day? And you get to thousands and thousands of trips in a place, here in Los Angeles. And once you put that out over a fleet of 100 vehicles, some of the math that I've done, these planes will pay for themselves in 2 years. There's nothing that you will buy that will be able to, they get to depreciate the vehicle. Who cares? It's already paid for. They can swap out the batteries once the batteries need to be replaced, but the airframe is still good to go. So these things are going to be a money printer. And the vertiports, the more nodes that they do, I think real estate, and I'm not sure how much you dabble into that. That's not really my world, but I can see what's going to happen is you're going to have these vertiports. We think about them in the city, but what about the place that has, the suburbs right outside? I'm thinking like the Westchesters in New York, those type of locations where what you could do with, putting multiple vertiports even close by to kind of spread out. You would essentially have like a flock of people that you could fly in and out, and you just
I love it.
Yeah, you just turn essentially a bus in the air. And then one other component of why I think the vertiports will be so crucial for Joby and how they'll be able to extend this out is Joby's invented their own proprietary charging infrastructure. The name of it's called Geeks, but it's spelled GEACS. And it's kind of similar to what Tesla did for having superchargers versus going with the CCS that all the other cars use. But that technology is very specific, and that was designed so that they will be able to both offload or download and upload data. They'll be able to charge multiple battery packs, because there's a charger on each wing. But then also, because of that too, you have coolant that will be able to flow through the system. So you're going to be offloading energy data and coolant all through their charging network. And that will actually unlock so that you can have, rapid operations. Because again, you could have 30 vertiports, but if it takes, an hour to charge these things in between, the business case goes up in smoke. So anyway, those are some things where I think Joby will really have the lead, in the long term. And you're going to start to see what I believe will happen. You're joking about 10 and 20 years for transportation, but you're going to see a developer who now, builds a set of homes somewhere, but not so far out. And they're going to say, hey, you know what? We're going to build this huge neighborhood. We're going to put a golf course. We're going to put a pool. We're going to put a school. We're going to put all these things. And, you will go into the city or wherever you need to get doctors or this, that, and the other via these vehicles. And my family lives on the East Coast in a fairly rural area outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And, I joke with my mom, it takes her 2 hours to get to the airport. If Joby existed there, it would take her 20 minutes. And that's everybody in that town, and they would have no other way to get there. So again, it's just the spigot for demand is going to be turned on instantly. And again, the Uber partnership, people sleep on that, but over $100 million will end up being pocket change compared to when Joby gets certified, launches service, and all of a sudden you open Uber and it's there. I posted once, I think it was like 10 million New York City Uber rides, happening. It's like the amount of access that Joby is going to have long term. Vertiports, some of the software, these other connections, the plane is going to be, table stakes. And I think that's going to be in the next probably, 12 months or so.
Yeah, no, look, the all of this, and it's what excites us, is so obvious of kind of what the next step of transportation is. The question, though, is, again, operational throughput, things like that. How big in Dubai, I guess, was this vertiport? How big do you think these vertiports will be? Because if you can fit, I've seen different companies building different sizes, everything from 40 people down to 3 people. A plane can fit, somewhere along the lines of, 500 people with the biggest. I don't know exactly how many fit in the biggest, but 500 people in one plane. I'm thinking of that 20-minute route, right, that we all envision and hope that we can go from here to downtown in 10, 15, 20 minutes. Quickly get off and live your life. The throughput, though, once you start thinking about all of us trying to do it, how many vertiports? How big do these vertiports need to be to make that experience? What we envision it to be. So, like, how big was that vertiport? The one in Dubai, roughly.
Yeah, gosh, in terms of just eyeballing, I mean, we've got.
I know it's a satellite, but
show these exact things. But the footprint, so it sits right in front of the Emirates terminal at DXB at the Dubai airport. Gosh, let's call it half of a football field.
Got it. So that would probably fit maybe what? 30, maybe 100 of those. If you looked at every.
Oh, in terms of vehicles?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, you have. It's such an obvious way to commute, right? And actually, the cost per trip, from some of the math that I've seen out there, is pretty low relative to the alternative. So you get there faster, and you get there either at the same price and probably over time cheaper. Obviously, autonomous vehicles and driving is going to be a whole nother ballgame, and they're all going to converge on each other at the same time, probably in the next 10, 15 years. Sooner than that, from what it looks like, but at scale. So I'm thinking of, who's not going to want to do this, and therefore there's going to be supply demand imbalance. And so I'm just trying to think: are we going to have just long lines, right, where all of a sudden it's now taking an hour and a half instead of 20 minutes because we're all waiting for the next Joby, one of the S4 or the Midnights to come over here. And so I'm just thinking of throughput relative to, what we all envision.
No, that's a great point, and to kind of double click. So specific to the vertiport, which will be dubbed DXV at the DXB airport to make it confusing. So that as of currently, and the plans have already been approved by RTA, so we know exactly what that's going to look like. The majority of it will actually be a parking garage, which is interesting. And then there'll only be 2 landing locations. And some people might say, well, that doesn't make sense. How can you ever scale exactly the questions that you said, which all make sense? I think the biggest component that is missed is having done this in Los Angeles, you need to stagger these flights. So it's actually less important to have them all take off all at once and all land all at once. So you need to have essentially a service where you can stagger between two aircraft. You're going to need 5-10 minutes to load people. The aircraft will charge during that time anyway. But you're to stagger it. So it's every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, you would have a takeoff. So you don't need to have so much space at the landing location, as much as to the throughput that you said that you're mentioning is that people have a place to park. Is it, easily accessible, which it's literally, it couldn't be any closer to the airport. There's a metro stop that's also right there. You take an elevator up and you're in the airport. So all those things, the throughput will also be from the security side, like how quickly can you get them through? And really, again, I just want to push on it. The vertiports and standing up more nodes is obviously it's the only way to scale. And that's how we get the network effects. But you could have 100 nodes and 5 airplanes and you've wasted all of your time. And so I think that's where Joby, I'm very thankful for what they've done with their plan in Dubai. We know exactly where it is. Having spent some time in Dubai, the routes are legit. They are solving an actual problem. If it takes 30 minutes in a car and you can only do it in 20 minutes in a Joby, as much as I'm, for the company, that's a very hard sell for an individual. But when you start, getting over an hour time and cutting it down into the 20s, then people will say, take my money. And I think this is where, manufacturing, this is where the Toyota relationship is where, Joby starts to just really, really pull away from the pack, but moreover, bring up the beginning part. This is a nascent industry. I'm not, it won't be Joby forever. But they have all the pieces in place, because to the point, you could have 100 nodes, 5 airplanes, business failure. You could have 5 nodes and 100 airplanes, money printer. And that's what Joby's after. Obviously that'll start in Dubai, but even here in the States, I think people need to, dig in a little bit deeper about what these business cases are. A lot of times the Delta partnership is highlighted, and I'm a big proponent of that. Lifelong Delta flyer, well before Joby even came into the picture. But the airport unlock isn't just flying people to an airport. Here in LA, if you flew from anywhere to LAX, it would take you more time to get off of that and then get through the terminal. It wouldn't make sense for you to do it. But what Joby and Delta have already talked about, what they're already in works with TSA, but also out here in LA, for instance, they're also doing the work at JFK, but here with LA World Airports, is you're going to take the Joby from downtown LA, from Van Nuys, from Orange County, and you're going to land past TSA. You're going to get out of the Joby. You're going to go up an elevator into the Sky Club. And this is going to be a premium product. And the amount of friction that will reduce for essentially, no added cost for the airlines, because they're going to, Delta's going to bundle that, the amount of money that they're already spending on these top level, medallion members. That's who's going to, this is all telegraphed. It's all obvious. But
it's all the business flyers / premium
travel. All these things are going to start to, it's, at times I feel like a crazy person saying this stuff, because like, Travis, you're crazy, right? There's no way they could pull this off. But if you have 100 airplanes and you could fly around a city, you wouldn't even notice them first off in the sky. But the amount of revenue that can be generated off of that, and we know that these vehicles, have, for all intents and purposes, it's an EV in the sky. In terms of the powertrain, the reliability, this has been tested over time. That was the whole thing on Tesla. It's like, when the Model S originally came out, it's going to fall apart. The battery's going to degrade, blah, blah, blah. It turned out the Model S got voted the best car ever. And maybe a little tie-in to that is the gentleman who leads Joby's powertrain and electronics team, John Wagner, was an OG Tesla executive and leader, and he led the powertrain team that developed the Model S battery, which was cutting-edge technology. It's the benchmark even now. Lucid's made some recent gains, but extremely intelligent individual, has all sorts of different patents and backgrounds from Tesla, even from Joby. He and the CEO, Joe Ben, started a robotics company together after work at Stanford. So like the amount of brain power that is behind this thing and making this work, just overall, I know we're kind of skewing a couple different things together, but really, really, there's a lot of depth to Joby that I think sometimes in all the headlines gets lost.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately what you're saying is, less so even about the opportunity at hand, but it's some of the people behind the scenes that are making some of this technology come together are, in some ways best in class. So it's kind of just emphasizing the idea that they're going vertical, but at the same time, they have, some of the people that are, well qualified to go vertical versus just trying to do everything.
I would just one thing to that, Sean, is kind of not to give people homework, but if you are curious, I think it is important. This isn't an app. Right? They have an app, but this isn't an app. This isn't just a software company. This is making airplanes. This is souls in the sky. This is people's lives that will eventually, every time we get into an airplane now, most people who aren't afraid, you don't think about it, but this is serious business. Yeah. And, I think it's very important to know who the people are behind the scenes. There is all the executives. I don't think there's one actually who doesn't have an engineering degree and or an engineering degree and is a pilot. And that's who I want to be at the helm of my aerospace company. That's who I want to be making these decisions. And I think, if people do the homework and look up, the expertise of the people leading this company, these are people you'd want to bet on.
Yeah. So someone that is doesn't like flying at all. One of the exciting things about this is really around what sounds like, at a very high level, the safety mechanics of these vehicles and, the fact that, all the different systems are, separate from one another. So you have redundancy across the board. I would love for you to share a little bit about, the safety that's inherent in just simply these type of, vehicles, eVTOLs.
Sure. Well, the first thing, and it's the big thing, is Joby, the S4 vehicle, has 0 single points of failure. Meaning there's redundancies literally to every single layer of this platform, to kind of not bury the lead. If people will just, look up, Joby did a flight at Edwards Air Force Base and they called it failure injection testing. If you look it up on YouTube, but you can literally just watch them take off, vertically, get on the wing, fly through transition, turn off one of the engines purposefully. As the system is set up, it always balances itself. So it actually turns off another one. So it flies on the wing with 4 of 6 motors.
Was somebody in there? Somebody in that vehicle?
This is remotely.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And that's just for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you can watch them fly up. It'll also come back into land, and you'll start to actually see that the centrifugal force of, those engines were off and I didn't even know it. They've also turned off actuators, disconnected batteries, and you can watch a video. It's kind of boring because nothing happens, but that's what you want. Sure. So the layers of redundancy there are pretty impressive. A couple pieces that people always get brought up with EVs is battery fires, which a lot of that was just Tesla stuff that wasn't actually happening. Teslas are much less likely to catch on fire than a combustion vehicle, but it was just in the media and whatnot. So Joby, again, at the behest of John Wagner, has decided that the architecture of how they split apart their packs. So there's 4 packs on the aircraft, but each one is made up of the individual cells, and those cells are contained. And again, you can see this in there's a video between John Wagner and Sandy Monroe. Again, all this information is it's right there for people to chew on. But you can see that the battery modules are all individually hermetically sealed, or it's like a titanium type of alloy that this is in. So in terms of if there was some event where you had a battery fire or whatnot, you wouldn't have thermal runaway. It's all contained. So again, these are things where this aircraft, there's no single points of failure. It has 6 engines, but it can fly with only 4 perfectly, and you wouldn't even notice a difference. Can
it fly with 1?
At 1,
who knows?
At 1, that would be a significant challenge. There has been some work though for similar, like if it happened when you're on the wing, just like an airplane can glide.
Got it.
Joby hasn't given out specifics of that, but that would be required within their certification. Anyway, another kind of cool piece of the technology and safety level of things is all of the components of their aircraft are tested well above what they actually need to fly. So, let's say if Joby, the aircraft, they've already been testing it to be at 50 for all the components, the interior, the cabin, the motors, the batteries, everything to be fully, functional, no issues at 50 Celsius. Dubai is hot. Sometimes it gets kind of, near to that, but not that hot. So meaning Joby, it's called the Mojave test, but Joby's already passed that. So Joby's vehicle can operate at the hottest parts of the Earth. And moreover, that only really takes an effect at the ground. Once you get up in the air temperature is a lot cooler. Again, John Wagner and Sandy Monroe go over that and that functionality. Cool thing with electric powertrain is that you just need a bunch of power to lift it up vertically, but once it's on the wing, you're essentially using no power. So a lot of safety built into the system, the redundancy. Obviously, also Joby has elected to go with a pilot on board. They already have a company that they've acquired called X-Wing that has autonomous technology that's already retrofitted Cessna Grand Caravan aircraft for the military and flown those autonomously, where it'll take off. You don't give it any directions. It'll find an airport, it'll land, come back. Joby will eventually merge that into the S4 vehicle. But for now, they'll have a pilot on board. And again, to safety, as much as you can tell people up and down that the thing's safe, I don't think you're going to have parents with their children or people who are hesitant to fly, or you said you don't love to fly. If that thing doesn't have a pilot in it, you're not even going to not even entertain the concept. So it's looking forward for people to see a little bit more behind the scenes of the safety that Joby has, and I think they'll probably do some demos right before launch that just highlight some of those things, i.e., to your question, probably turning off the engine, a couple of the engines with a pilot on board just to show people that, somebody's been in there while it happened.
Sure. One area that, you just briefly touched on was defense. Archer has made, some sort of partnership with Anduril. How is Joby, I guess, going after defense? You've spoken a little bit on, some of your other podcasts you've been on, but I just wanted to, lay it out here on this podcast so, people can understand, some of the use case or, usability on the defense side as well.
Sure. Yeah, this is, again, one of these kind of odd misnomers out there, especially in the eVTOL sector. And I think it's been more maybe just how some of the PR has been spun. But Joby to date has the most funding from the government, in particular, out of all of the players, that being Archer and then Beta, who's not publicly traded. But all of them have participated in this program that was once called Agility Prime, which was part of AFWorks, is part of the Air Force's advanced research wing. And then prior to that, Joby also had funding. Their original funding was from DIU, which is the Defense Innovation Unit, which is essentially out of the Pentagon, but it's one of those things. Hey, we'll show you the front of the restaurant, but you can't see the back. And so Joby has been, I want to say it's $161 million when I've added it up last. It's either something right around there. 161 is the total program value for the Agility Prime project for Joby. I mean, they've realized quite a bit of that. There's somebody, his name's Wags. If you follow me, you'll see Wags, but he used to be an acquisition manager in the military. So he can read through these contracts and actually see, just because, some of the competitors have mentioned they have a deal, but you actually have to actualize the money within the deal and to realize it. And that's, I think, been misleading a bit by some others. But also Joby is the only company in the space that has actually delivered a vehicle to the military, the DoD, and that is at Edwards Air Force Base. Now they have two vehicles, November 5421 Alpha and November 542 Juliet X-Ray. So those two vehicles are at Edwards Air Force Base. Those are flying. They've already been testing those for a while. That's where they did the failure injection testing. They've already done pilot on board testing there. This is not to say, not to make this a competition or to, a boxing match, but this was something that recently, when I was just doing my research, because you never want to be so stubborn that you stop learning, is to make sure I didn't miss anything. And Archer has also, sometimes people will talk about the Archer also delivered a plane to the military, and that's what the headline read. But if you actually open up the release and read it, they did what they called a delivery in place concept, which was they didn't actually deliver it to the military. The military showed up, they took a video, and the military went home, and that plane still sat in Salinas. That's November 302 Alpha X-Ray. What's interesting about that vehicle that Archer had said they delivered to the government is the same vehicle that they just sent to Abu Dhabi that just did a hover but it can fly VTOL through transition, but it didn't. So anyway, just some interesting things about when you hear things about the DoD and defense with eVTOL, to scratch a little bit under the surface to see who actually has delivered an airplane that is actually flying at an actual military base versus who said that they did that.
Yeah. Now certification, regulatory, obviously, having these, already call it approved, certified in the, defense should give you a leg up on that, on when it comes to like FAA. But just talk about the progress there, number one, and then also, I think for me personally, and also, some of the people listening is, where are we today? We talked a little bit big picture of how, this could transform a lot of things, some of the different nuances of how Joby is vertiports, manufacturing, software, hardware, in Dubai today, trying to test, some of the safety, protocols that are in place and or just inherent to these vehicles, specifically Joby's. Just talk about, where we are today versus kind of that long-term kind of like mission. And then also, what should we be looking out for the next, year, 2 years, 5 years, something around that timeline.
Sure. Yeah. So for right now, the big focus around certification, that is through the FAA, but and FAA is the benchmark throughout the world in terms of the aviation regulator. So there's a lot of reciprocal agreements already in place, and there's some that have just recently been added. So Secretary Duffy just announced that there's going to be the United States, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are going to create a consortium to all approve the framework that will for these particular vehicles all at once. So Joby is working with the FAA, but that's going to trickle out throughout the world and all the different regulating bodies. There's only a couple main umbrellas entities. Joby is working with all of them directly. And so that's what certification looks like. The DoD component for Archer, Joby, anybody, you don't have to have FAA type certification to operate these vehicles for the DoD. They can use them as experimental and some other, kind of nuances. So the certification is more focused on the commercial application of these things, and also is crucial for them to be sold because in the new executive order that was just called Unleashing America's Drone Dominance, that they lifted some import export restrictions, about these vehicles. And so once they're certified here, also we'll be able to ship them out. There won't be any because military or DoD connections restrictions there. So anyway, that's what certification will be to kind of close that piece. What does that look like moving forward next 12 months? It looks like Joby within the next 12 months will have received some type of approval, call that certification or authorization in Dubai from the RTA and GCAA. That may or may not happen before FAA. That's been this closely guarded secret. I still just highly doubt that America is going to let this technology be built here and not be the one, especially with the current administration and everything else. So we'll see how that shakes out of which one happens first. But where we sit now is in the stage, there's 5 stages. Joby is quite far along in the stage 4 process. And that is where they're just kind of wrapping up everything before they start the final exam. Kind of put this in those terms. So what they're working towards is TIA, type inspection authorization, credit flights, meaning that the FAA or engineers that can work for Joby that have authority to sign off as they are from the FAA to essentially. Joby's already done all these test cards. They've been coming up with their means of compliance to say, okay, this is what we're going to prove to you, that this plane can do X, in this environment. We're going to be able to withstand this much vibration, this much temperature change. These aircraft can operate in these flight conditions, X, Y, Z, the litany of things that you would need. All those are being buttoned up right now. And then towards the end of this year, Joby has already said that they have a vehicle that they're putting together that would essentially holistically be conforming or very close to, that they would start the TIA for credit flights. And that means that we'd be getting towards the end of stage 4. And stage 5 is just putting together that final kind of book report and delivering it to FAA for the final stamp. That is, once that happens, certification becomes a really expensive piece of paper. To your point earlier about how much capital it takes. It is also part of the moat of this business. it will be, even if things get commoditized, it's extremely difficult to make an aircraft and get it certified. But anyway, that, I've said it before, that the certification will be an expensive piece of paper afterwards. Then everything will switch to this other piece that people have kind of missed is the aircraft has to get certified, but so does the production facility and production line. Joby has theirs set up for that process. They've had that set up since I was there in 2022. Every bolt, every screw, every workstation has cameras, lasers all around it. So everything, it's the only way you can have quality control for airspace. So that's what really I think you'll look at once we get to that's 2 years out. And then you say 5 and 10 years, the biggest thing will be how many aircraft they can make. And then where do we start to deploy those? Because obviously we know there's going to be the Dubai market, LA, New York here in the United States. But something maybe, because I know we're about to wrap here, but kind of as a little teaser and maybe for a future conversation, the Toyota relationship has been mostly thought about as around manufacturing. There was a recent filing when Toyota closed the first $250 million tranche of the $500 million that they announced last October. But in that filing, there was something that was called Toyota Air Taxi Operations, Section 4.3. I'll never forget it. And in Section 4.3, it essentially tells you the blueprint of Toyota is going to start their own air taxi service into the future. And so when you look at 5, 10, 15 years down the line, I think you're going to see Toyota try and get 1,000 planes or more. I think they recently signed a deal with ALG in Saudi Arabia. I think that they're going to probably want to do you're going to start to see these really large contracts. So to date in the space, we've only heard about those from Archer and their order book that they have. But again, people can promise you can have a PO to sell 1 million airplanes at $5 million a piece. You have to be able to make them. And again, that goes to after certification, you got to certify the manufacturing line, but then it'll just be scaling out these markets and some of these bigger players. This is not just going to be Joby running this Uber operation. You're going to really start to see some incredible things, I think, from their markets. I mean, what will happen to the company and the stock? This is a question. I'm not saying anything. A question is if Toyota comes out with a press release and says, hey, we're going to buy 1,000 planes from Joby and we're going to convert one of our facilities to start building them here in Japan, I think that would probably be pretty well received.
Sure. Cool. Look, I know we're both running out of time here. So let's wrap. Would love to bring you back on, maybe after the report or something like that, consistently following this. I think this is going to be a trend with us for quite some time. Yeah. I appreciate everything today. And, this was Avery Around the Desk. Obviously, if you want to follow, Travis, Let's Talk Joby on X, obviously he posts religiously on there about Joby. So if, you're specific to that, good place to follow him. But with that, we can wrap, and thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you, Sean. And I look forward to, the space is extremely exciting for, not just the next, week. It's exciting for, decades to come. So I think hopefully future conversations we can flesh out a bit more.